Welcome to Interview Training for Hiring Managers. Introduction. Hiring the best candidate for every job is a goal we all share. A critical part of the hiring process is the personal interview. While you as an interviewer would like to have all the information you can obtain from a candidate, you must avoid asking any question that may be considered discriminatory. The costs for an employer to defend itself against a claim of illegal discrimination are significant. This presentation provides hiring managers with the information they need to know about how to conduct lawful interviews. Today we will be reviewing federal laws, what to ask and not to ask, volunteered information, consistency. Federal laws. Some federal laws to consider while interviewing are Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Age Discrimination in Employment Act, Americans with Disabilities Act, Immigration Reform and Control Act, Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, National Labor Relations Act, and Uniformed Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act. What to ask and not to ask about race. Questions about race during an interview are prohibited. However, race is often legitimately needed for affirmative action purposes or to track applicant flow. One way to obtain racial information and simultaneously guard against discriminatory selection is for employers to use a Form EEO-1, voluntary self-identification. Employers must keep a completed Form EEO-1 separate from the application and not share the information on it with others or consider the information during the selection process. This form will be provided and kept by the Human Resource Department. Assumptions about traditional family roles can adversely affect women's employment opportunities. It is best to avoid family-related questions for both sexes. What to ask and not to ask about sex or marital status. Sex or marital status. Instead of asking, "Are you married? When do you plan to start a family? Do you have children?" Ask, "Are you available to travel as required by the job description? Can you work overtime with little or no notice? Can you work evenings and weekends?" What to ask and not to ask about national origin or citizenship. National origin or citizenship. Instead of, "Are you a citizen of the U.S.? What country are you from? Where is your accent from? What nationality is your last name? When does your visa expire?" Ask, "If you are hired, are you able to provide documentation to prove that you are eligible to work in the U.S.? It is prohibited to discriminate based on the anticipation that a worker's eligibility will have to be re-verified after a visa expires. One notable exception is positions that require security clearances. Employers that have jobs that require security clearances should consult with an attorney on the best way to phrase questions about citizenship in relation to the clearance that is required. What to ask and not to ask about religion. Religion. Employers may ask questions and receive information about religion only when a bona fide occupation qualification exists, such as when hiring a clergy person for a religious establishment. Limit questions about outside activities to those that are relevant to the job. Asking about volunteer work or memberships may elicit information that you don't want, such as religious or political work. Often employers give candidates the impression that they are making an employment decision based on age when in fact they need to establish that a candidate is old enough to do the job. For example, minors are not allowed to perform many jobs, such as serving alcohol or using bladed equipment. Be sure to phrase the question so that it does not imply discrimination that violates the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. What to ask and not to ask about age. Age. Instead of, "When did you graduate? When do you intend to retire?" Ask, "Do you meet the minimum age requirements for the job? Can you supply transcripts of your education?" An employer may not ask a job applicant to answer disability-related questions or take a medical exam before extending a job offer. An employer also may not ask job applicants if they have a disability or about the nature of an obvious disability. This would violate the Americans with Disabilities Act. An employer may ask job applicants whether they can perform the job and how they would perform the job, with or without a reasonable accommodation. What to ask and not to ask about disability. Disability. instead of, do you have a disability? Have you ever filed a workers' compensation claim? Do you have a history of drug or alcohol abuse? Ask, can you perform the duties listed in the job description, with or without accommodation? If a worker has an obvious disability or reveals a hidden disability, you may ask the applicant to describe or demonstrate how he or she would perform job duties. Employers must provide reasonable accommodation to candidates who have disabilities. If you need assistance providing accommodations, please contact Human Resources. Military discharge status may contain information about disability discharges. Therefore, asking about it would violate the Uniformed Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act. What to ask and not to ask about military service. Military. Instead of, please provide the status of your military discharge. Will you miss work to perform military service? Ask, what experience did you gain in the uniformed service that is relevant to the job you would be doing? What to ask and not to ask about arrests and convictions. The U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, guidance on employer use of criminal background checks requires employers to conduct an individualized assessment of an employee or applicant's criminal history to determine if the person's criminal background is job-related. Blanket policies or practices of excluding individuals with criminal records are not permitted. While the EEOC guidance does not prohibit employers from considering criminal information during the hiring process, it does require employers to take steps to prevent discrimination under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. During the interview process, do not ask questions related to this topic. Recruitment and Human Resources will process and analyze background checks prior to an official start date being determined. Volunteered information. Even when you ask only legal questions during an interview, you may receive information you would prefer not to know from applicants who make such a disclosure voluntarily. For example, an applicant may disclose that she is pregnant and will need time off for childbirth if she is hired. The best way to handle this situation is not to pursue it and not make any note of it. Just as you should ask only job-related questions, you must disregard any information the applicant voluntarily discloses that is not related to the job. In addition, when an applicant asks you questions, make sure to keep your answers professional. Do not assume nonchalant responses will not offend the applicant. Consistency. To be sure that you obtain the same information from all candidates for a position, it is important to prepare and consistently use the same questions for each interview and follow a structured interview process. Doing this will help ensure that you treat all candidates equally and fairly and help you avoid any complaints of illegal discrimination. Additional resources. Please refer to the additional resource attached to the email, the Hiring Manager's Complete Interviewing Guide, for more guidance on legal and effective interviews. Both the Recruiting and Human Resource departments are available if you have any questions. Have a wonderful day.